Fab. So, Gerard, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome.
There's a lot of kind of misinterpretations of guidance and government advice at the minute. So, I just wanted to talk to a professional who could shed a bit more light on things for businesses. So, how do you feel organisations should interpret the government's guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think ultimately the guidance is absolutely what it says. It is there as guidance, and they're the minimum requirements organisations should look to put in place. But I think the key to all of this is really that COVID-19 risk assessment that needs to be carried out, because the risk assessment will ultimately confirm what the organisations need to put in place, and that will vary by sector. So some organisations will have to go beyond the guidance to get that standard. But, it's very, very important that the guidance is followed, because that will help, complete that risk assessment process.
Gerard, how do you think the government guidelines might change?
No, I think they'll change considerably as we move forward. The whole process will evolve, and there's lots of trade industry guidance out there as well. So we'll learn a lot more about what the virus can actually do. So the medical science will inform us an awful lot more. And I suppose you kind of try and think of from the beginning. I remember when we kind of went onto lockdown, but the retailers stayed open. And if you go into a Sainsbury's or a Tesco's now, compared to the first week of lockdown, it's changed massively. They've got screens up, they've got little footprints which shows you direction of travel. So if you look at how they've evolved over the last couple of months, then I think that gives us a good indication with regards to government guidance. And, within weeks of issuing the initial guidance, they were updating it. So as we learn more, then I think it will be updated. But best practice will be a key part of this as well. But I also hope that when we do talk about updating guidance, we also go into an awful lot of reflection. I hear the words, the new normal, being used an awful lot on media. It doesn't sit comfortably with me, because new normal suggests there's never any going back. And I think, as a human being, we're social beings, and, being social means we want contact. It's nice to shake somebody's hand. And I dread the thought that if forever we've got a 2-metre rule in place. So I think the guidance needs to also look at historical things whereby we actually did do things in a good way, and not be afraid to go back and take down some of these measures that we actually had.
Government announcements are obviously coming out every day. How can people prepare in between those announcements in so much as getting their staff back into the workplace?
Well, again, there is lots of guidance out there which is going to help lots and lots of different sectors, but it's looking at what that guidance says and things that they can prepare for before people go back. So, planning is a key part of this. So good risk assessment that's carried out will greatly assist in that. And it's looking at things like, hand washing facilities and, plenty of hygiene operations going on when people do actually get back, and it's going to be tricky. So, for example, when hospitality opens, they're going to have to look at social distancing, 2 meters, and that's apparent. It's, in for every single sector. So how do you physically get social distancing going on in the likes of a hotel when people are checking in, checking out, restaurants, bars, So all of these become an important part of the risk assessment process. But I'm also, again, quite cautious that we go back to, simple health and safety principles, which is like the hierarchy of risk control, which says, wherever possible, engineer the solution. There's an awful lot we hear about face masks, and, a face mask is ultimately there to stop you spreading germs to other people. It doesn't kind of protect the individual themselves, depending on what type of mask it is, but it's the very bottom of that hierarchy of risk control. So the bottom two are safe systems of work and PPE, and the reason for that is because it relies completely on people to follow it. And even this morning, listening to the news, it's talking about children going back to school and social distancing. Teachers are actually quite sensible, and they're saying, I'm not sure we can actually manage that, because if you've got a 4-year-old and they want to play with their friends and their friends in a different part, I'm sorry, but it's going to be very, very hard to police that. And I think organisations, they've got to be mindful of what supervision is required to actually police this. So it's going to be very difficult, but the key to preparing to go back is get that assessment in place and understand what the risks are, because they are going to be different by sector.
How can people find out about risk assessments and things? Where can they find out how to do them?
Well, again, with the guidance, it's very, very easy. You know, the HSE, even IOSH, they've published some brilliant, you know, information on dealing with COVID. HSE, the government, they've got risk assessment templates. So really simple, step-by-step, you know, advice to follow. So there is lots and lots out there. Trade associations, again, so there's lots out there. I think you'll find, like with hospitality, for example, all the relevant trade associations will be giving them guidance and templates to follow. And, you know, I've looked at that guidance and, you know, I've got to say, a lot of that is really, really pragmatic. So it's simple to follow.
What can employers do if it is impossible to practice social distancing in their workplace? Obviously, some workplaces are going to differ. Not everyone's in an office environment.
Yeah, and you know, this is a really, really key talking point, I think, for organisations. There's two aspects to this. The first one is ensuring the frequency of things like hand washing and surface cleaning, etc. But also then to look at things like side-to-side working or back-to-back working, minimising the time that people are working together. Yeah, because it's not always going to be possible. If you think about food manufacturing, you will have people working, you know, well within 2 meters by nature of the layout and the design of the environment. But a lot of them will be working side to side. The other aspect of it is the important one is if it can't be done safely, then you have to seriously question, can we actually provide that service? Can we reopen with it? Because, you know, the HSE and the government have been very key to point out that there are still legal requirements that if you're not providing a safe working environment, then you shouldn't be operating. And that's a really tough question, I think, for organisations to answer because they're desperate to get up and working. But there are certain organisations whereby that's going to be really, really hard to do. I often talk about on training courses, you know, risk assessment being the key to everything that we do. And there's kind of, you end up with a level of risk that you have to determine whether it's acceptable or tolerable. You know, so a good example, if you put controls in and we say, actually, we're really happy and that person is at very, very little risk, we call that acceptable. Tolerable is something whereby the level goes up a little bit. So if you think about a retail distribution company, at Christmas, they may get double the volume of stock in. They get double the volume of stock going out, but the space doesn't change that's available to them. So their actual level of risk goes up. The key there is putting controls in to still make it tolerable. So after Christmas, they then can go back to acceptable risk. I think with COVID-19, we won't have anything whereby it's a tolerable risk because it's such an unknown virus that we've got with regards to how it's actually passed on. The medical science doesn't tell us that. So you can't say, well, if you're working face to face and it's only for an hour, it's tolerable, because the answer is it isn't. You know, so we have to be quite clinical with regards to the controls that go into place.
So what would be your top 3 tips for companies who are looking to get their employees back into the workplace?
Well, I think my number 1 tip, the most important one, is consultation with the people that are going to be doing the work. You know, that's key to absolutely everything. If employees are on board from the beginning through consultation, you know, we will find out what their fears are, what are their expectations, but vitally, what are their, you know, expectations with regard to what a safe environment looks like. So number 1 has to be the getting the employees involved. And if we talk about, you know, going back to the COVID-19 risk assessment, you know, my fear is that somebody may have walked around and done a risk assessment without involvement of any of the people that are going to be doing that activity. And therefore, it probably won't work. The second thing is really the monitoring. So once we've got people back to work, making sure that what we've put in place is actually working. And if not, be prepared to take it out. You know, I think the big fear with this is that we're very good at putting things in. So, for example, we may put a 2-meter rule in, you know, but we have to be very, very clear that we can also take things out. You know, so as it moves on and we know more about it, we shouldn't be scared of taking things out. And I go back to that word new normal. You know, to me, new normal includes old normal. So don't be afraid to go back. So if things aren't working, be prepared to change so as it will work in practice. And I think finally, the other key part is understanding what this whole outbreak has done to individuals. So be very considerate of what a person is potentially going through, their mental well-being. Lots and lots of people have a lot of anxieties with regards to, they may have loved ones that have lost their jobs. There may be financial worries. There may be worries about their children, their family, what is going to happen at school. So the mental well-being part of it, be very considerate of that in order to get the workforce completely engaged.
What processes should companies be following when they reopen the workplace?
Well, I kind of have to go right back again, Amy, to the whole principle of the risk assessment being so important. And I think that's why the government has issued so much guidance, because that risk assessment is ultimately what's going to determine the different controls that companies will have to follow in order to reopen the workplace.
What potential liability can organisations face if their working practices aren't safe?
Well, ultimately, Amy, I don't think anything's changed with this. We had the Health and Safety at Work Act, etc., in 1974 come out, and it was quite clear to employers. It said you have a duty to provide a safe working environment for people and to look after their health, safety, and welfare. So there's been absolutely no change. So from a enforcement point of view, I think health and safety executive, environmental health officers, they will be following exactly the same principles. This is just one new risk that we've added into the whole matrix. And, good organisations will have a risk register, and this is just one more to add to it. But, this isn't an excuse to not do health and safety. It's something we just have to be mindful of. It's a new risk that we have to incorporate into everything else that we do. And under criminal law, it's very, very transparent as to what the expectations are. But I would also say the law talks about the word reasonably practicable. That means it's going to be different for every organisation. So what's reasonably practicable for a small independent hairdresser, is very, very different from what's reasonably practicable from a multinational retailer. And the reason it's reasonably practical is because cost comes into the equation. So I think it not being absolute will help smaller organisations still meet their legal requirements, but it will be in a different way to larger organisations.
Do you think, additionally, we're at risk of seeing the number of cases where employees take their employer to court if they don't follow health and safety guidance in terms of COVID-19?
Yeah, this is the big danger, because when it comes to civil law, then the test is a little bit different, because the test under civil law is quite based on, what's reasonably foreseeable, and it uses different knowledge bases for that. So, somebody could say, my employer has been negligent because it was reasonably foreseeable that if you put somebody next to me, that the coronavirus could be, contracted by myself, and therefore there could be an argument to say, well, yeah, the medical science said that, so why would you have them working together in that environment? And therefore to prove that case would be a hell of a lot easier than some things. I think it is a risk for organisations. I think a lot of them are mindful of the compensation culture, and we may well see them coming through. But if they've done everything that's reasonably practicable, they should be absolutely fine. So I hope that's not the driver for putting things in. I hope the driver is to look after people as opposed to this fear of potentially compensation claims.